Namaskar दोस्तों, good evening friends. I'm Anupam, your host today in Secrets of Astrology podcast. As you know that from Mexico, United States of America, Lars Panaro, a versatile musician, nature lover, good human being, and an astrologer is with us. And in last episode, he told about his journey for all of us to relate with. Now we are going to ask him about his exposure toward Western and Indian astrology. Basically, he is well aware of Hellenistic as well Indian astrology, and he respects both of them. Along with, as we know that there are quite similarities and dissimilarities between both the systems. But as he told that we do not have to be very stiff on anything. We have to understand about any sutra or anything to, I think, benefit the society, the prospect which are looking for your services. So, Lars, uh, I need to know first of all that you uh, went ahead in your journey with both the way Western and Indian astrology, Hellenistic and Indian astrology. You know quite well, and especially I've seen your episodes on Bharat Yavan Jatak, and especially I think referred by David Pingree also. So I am looking forward from you that how these both the systems are quite parallel to each other and what are the dissimilarities, and especially when we say about the timing of event with the Shah or the fifth or the timing given to the planets in Hellenistic, or we can say the aspect principle or the solar mentions and lunar mentions. So many things are there. So what's your take on that, Lars?
Thanks. Yeah, this is a topic really near and dear to my heart for a lot of reasons. These two systems are kind of like two sides of the same coin, sister systems. There's a lot of parallels between them. You can see in some cases where, in some of the old texts, like Yavana Jataka, Brihat Parashara Horashastra, and so on, some parallel techniques, some parallel systems, and in some cases some differences too. Like in Parashara, he gives a system of planets being strong during the day versus the night, which is a big part of Hellenistic astrology, as it's especially as it's been kind of repropagated, or not repropagated, but just like as it's made a renaissance, which is called sect. Is it a day chart or a night chart? And so um, in Hellenistic astrology, Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter gain power during the day, and Venus, Mars, Moon gain power during the night. Mercury being neutral, basically, he can go either way. And in Parashara, it's a little different. I believe he gives Venus strength during the day instead of maybe Saturn. And so those two are switched. And so these are things I look at, and I'm not sure uh, was that switch made on purpose at some point? Are these two different doctrines that just happen to be similar? I don't really know, but these are important questions to ask and to look at, and being somebody who's studied both and continues to study both, that's a situation where I have to look at both and choose the one which makes the most sense to me. So for now, I go with the what we consider the Hellenistic doctrine of Jupiter, Sun, Saturn for the day, and Venus, Moon, Mars for the night, right? But like anybody, I'm always open to changing my techniques and my perspectives based upon how things speak to me over the years, right? So we should always be open to that as astrologers. So, okay, so that was just a quick example of kind of how these systems where you find some overlap. But what I do want to say as well is that, in my opinion, uh, in my opinion, the Hellenistic material is should not be considered Western. It pretty much all comes out of ancient Eastern civilizations, Egypt, Lebanon, Persia, and so on. even the later Persian astrologers that kind of developed their own tradition, that departed in many ways from some of the earlier texts. Persia to me is an Eastern nation, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and um, even Greece itself is has very much more in common with the East. And Hellenistic astrology is not necessarily Greek. Uh, many of the texts were written in ancient Greek because that was the scholarly language of the empire. But we're not necessarily talking about Greece proper. But even if we were, it needs to be said that so much comes directly out of India. So much that's influenced Greek culture and whatnot, Persian culture, and of course, there's been cross pollination. The Persians had a very major influence on North Indian classical music, but you'll also find that in ancient Persia there were Vedic fire temples and whatnot, and in Greece, if you study Greek medicine, you will find that it is very similar to Ayurveda and whatnot. So I think this is an important thing to realize because what we call Western astrology really only begins in maybe the 20th century, because prior to that, all of the Western astrological practices come out of these Eastern civilizations. And in the 20th century, you start to get things like Uranian astrology, which was developed by a German individual, which is a very powerful predictive system. He could predict artillery strikes with it, for example, in the World War. I forget if it was one or two. I think it was both. But anyway, that's a very modern invention, and you could call that Western. You could also call Western the modern sort of psychological systems of astrology that emerged throughout the 20th century. But astrology seems to really have, as we practice it, really has its birth in the East, in nations like India and or I should say civilizations like India, because there weren't really countries thousands of years ago. There were civilizations. So I think that's really important, and I keep that in mind as I work with Hellenistic and more traditional Jyotish techniques. And what I find is that the best way to blend them is really just organically, which means that you don't try to serve two masters. You just basically look at the various techniques and go, oh yeah, these could work together. These make sense, you know. Um, there's a wonderful text by Al-Biruni,
Hmm.
who was like a Muslim astrologer. I don't remember what century, maybe eighth or ninth century, but he spent a lot of time in India. He actually did translations of texts like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras into Arabic, and he was learned in Sanskrit. He learned about Indian astrology, and in his book on astrology, he even mentions things like, "Oh, and the Indians find the dignity this way." And he gives the same system that you find in Parashara for assessing dignity of friend signs and great friends and stuff like that, next to the traditional Persian Hellenistic system, right? So from examples like this, it's clear to me that ancient thinkers, polymaths, astrologers, they were not so in a box like we are today. And I find that a lot of Indian astrologers that I work with and I'm friends more open, tend to be more willing to experiment and take techniques from another system and incorporate it into their system. Probably the best example I have of that is my friend Ashwin Balaji, who wrote an entire book on Fradaria, which is a Persian dasha system, but he modified it. He added in his own calculation to include the nodes in the sub periods, right? So this is really wonderful, because this is like the type of thing that ancient astrologers were clearly doing. They were experimenting, they were adapting techniques from other systems to work in their own system. And so that's what I mean by organic. So Hellenistic astrology, the essence of it is really the same as Indian astrology. You know, the planets are, they have the same fundamental meanings for the most part. Even the nodes are pretty much treated in a very similar fashion, though I think the Indian astrologers did a lot more with the nodes over time. But you know, and then the 12 signs and the 12 houses and so on, like there are some subtle differences. Like for example, in Hellenistic astrology, they consider the 11th house to be the most auspicious house, whereas in Jyotish, I would say the ninth house is really more like the most auspicious house if you had to choose one. um but we can, you know, again, we can learn something from this. For the Hellenistic astrologers, clearly there seemed to be some influence philosophically of the 11th house in terms of gains, in terms of like realizing your hopes and dreams. That to them, I guess, was the highest good. And they considered it to be the house of the good spirit. You know, you have like this good spirit, this daimon or deva or something that kind of like, you know, helps you in life, like brings you towards good things. And so that they considered that to be the 11th house. So they even went so far as to say if a malefic is in the 11th house, it can't really do much harm. Like that's how good that house was to them, right? But for the classical Indian mentality, at least as we see it in most astrological texts of India, granted, granted, I haven't read all of them. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, that have never been translated. So, you know, just keep that in mind. But from what I've seen, the little bit I've seen, you know, the ninth house as the house of God and the house of Dharma and, you know, Bhagya and stuff. This, the guru and so on, this is the most important house for Jyotish. And it, to me, it suggests that that ancient Indian mentality was more aligned to these concepts of dharma and, you know, worshiping God. And so that's why the ninth house becomes perhaps more important. Whereas the many of the Hellenistic authors, they had this other view, you know, this view that basically like, you know, great good fortune is kind of the best thing that you can get in life or do in life or whatever. So that's maybe an oversimplification, but it's kind of like these are the lines I think along as I study these different perspectives. And ultimately, I've had to always just go with what made more sense to me. And since I am very, very captivated by Indian philosophy and culture and yoga and all of that stuff, I tend to lean a bit more towards the Jyotish side of things, but I still bring in some of the Hellenistic stuff like sect at times, like Oriental and Occidental, which is basically, is the planet rising before the sun during the day, or is it going to rise after the sun? This is a wonderful simple technique that helps with things like timing. Like, does it happen earlier in life or later in life? And there's some other nuances as well. So basically, if the way I work currently is I mostly defer to Jyotish, but then I'll go back to the Hellenistic works. And if I find a perspective or a technique that speaks to me, that makes sense to me philosophically, then I'll just take it. I'll just steal it. I'll just incorporate it into my work, you know? And techniques, different techniques resonate with different people. So there's a wonderful technique from Ptolemy in his work Tetrabiblos. And Ptolemy was an Egyptian astrologer and astronomer, um, where he basically explains that you can learn about the spouse from the sun and the moon. And so in a man's chart, you look at the moon for a wife, and in the woman's chart, you look at the sun for a husband. And people are experimenting with that today in terms of you know, like homosexual relationships. You have to kind of tweak it. I haven't gotten to experiment with that much yet, but I get the basic idea. So in any case, I find that, however, whenever I've used this technique, it works. It seems to work really well at describing the spouse. I look at the planets aspecting these luminaries using the classical Hellenistic aspects, which are a little different from the classical Jyotish aspects. You know, they're sextile, square, trine, and opposition. So, and conjunction, not technically an aspect, but you know, it's an influence. So yeah, it's like if you just look at these planets, you can actually pretty well determine the nature and quality of the different spouses, especially if you can determine that the person is likely to be married more than once, which you have to do from things like the seventh house and Venus and so on. Another technique that I really love using from Hellenistic, and that works great in the context of Jyotish, and you really don't have to change it much at all, is what are called lots or Arabic parts. They were later
System of
called Arabic
lots.
parts.
Yeah, system of
And
lots.
yeah, and in Tajika astrology, which is the Indian take on Persian solar returns, you know, yearly solar return astrology, they call them sahams.
Sahams.
Sahems, yeah. So the lots did make their way into Jyotish quite a long time ago, but you can use them in birth charts with Vimshotri Dasha and with all of the basic Jyotish things. You can make the lots into a lagna if you want and look at yogas from it. So, like for example, there's a lot called the lot of substance,
Hmm.
and it's taken from the Lord of the second house to the distance from that to the cusp of the second house. So you have to have a cuspal system. I use equal houses for that. So if my ascendant is 15 degrees Cancer, my second house cusp is 15 degrees Leo. You know, simple. And you find the distance, you add it to the ascendant, and wherever that falls, that's your lot of substance, which can show you something about money and where you're going to earn some money from, right? And then you can read it from there like a lagna. So you can take that sign. Let's say it falls in the sixth house for Cancer Lagna, that's Sagittarius. So you can look at the houses from there and see if there are any auspicious yogas or configurations. You can do, and you can find a lot for virtually any topic you want. If it doesn't exist, you just invent it. Just think about the planets that should be involved. There are literally lots and parts for things like cucumbers and onions and tomatoes because the astrologers needed a way to look at the success or failure of crops, for example. Then there are the more esoteric ones. You know, there's more esoteric ones like the lot of the Hilaj, which is supposed to tell you about the origin and purpose of the life. And this is very similar to techniques in Jyotish like Bhrigubindu, which is the distance between like Rahu and the moon
Oh,
or the
yeah.
midpoint. Um, the yogi point and the Ava yogi point, these are very, you know, they're like lots. They're very similar. And so just like some Jyotishis will use those as a lagna, you know, we can take the lots from the Hellenistic system and use them in a variety of ways. And they're even similar to upagrahas, you know, the shadowy grahas that are calculated through um, spatial and temporal matters. Like, you know, some of them are calculated based on a geometrical arrangement with the sun. Some of them are calculated based upon the hours on the day, and um, I'm no master of calculating those. They're complex calculations, but they are very evocative points if you spend some time kind of getting to know them like you would a friend. And so the same same thing with the lots. The
Yeah.
lots can the lots can reveal subtle information that is not so easy to find in other situations. So yeah, so really the two systems just have a lot to offer one another.
And definitely, I wish that in future also we are going to speak on the individual areas also like harmonics and divisional charts, and
Yeah, sure.
regarding yeah time lots and the dasha system. But
Yeah.
I have a pointer here, as you very well said about especially the 11th house and ninth house. somewhere in our mythology, incarnation is there. And as you know that 11th is just 12th to the house of we can say salvation and moksha. So
Yeah.
when you are going for path of salvation, then 11th, if it is the major house for the kama trikona and is house of desire, so
Hmm.
you have to take control of your desires, because you know that in Tripur sadhana, when you accomplished all the good qualities, then only you are going to utilize all of your good capabilities, good qualities. So I think there is some checkpoint, because in the trine itself with the 159, ninth is basically a pivot point for your righteous movement. And we are more inclined for the righteous movement, and of course we are I think based on the law of karma, and that is connected to the recycling of your rebirths and all. So definitely the these theories are based on some mythology, and as you very well said about that, once you are capable with the basic grammar like house, planet, and so many things, then you have like Sahams and all. There are all sensitive points which you can deal with the timing tools or with the transit, and definitely we are having so I think we can say so many things, especially in Indian astrology in the Tajik system itself. So this is a big domain, and you explained very well about Hellenistic as well, the Vedic astrology, and I
Thanks.
request you to that in coming days, whenever you have time, then definitely we love to hear you on these things sequentially. So, friends, this was his view and how he got to understand Hellenistic and Indian Vedic astrology, and he has given his view that when he was thinking of doing some kind of improvement, or in name of technique we can say rule system or system based reading we can say, then he's open to all those things, and we respect to that. So definitely in this sequence we like to hear some of the rule based, or we can say system based technique we can say in the coming episode. Lars, thank you very much for giving such a beautiful observation and insight from Hellenistic and Vedic astrology. So,
A pleasure.
friends, thank you. So, friends, in the episode 3, we are going to ask about one of his favorite system, which is layering technique. And we love to know that what specialty in that particular technique. So, stay tuned up with us. We will catch you in episode 3. Thank you.